Crowds gather, children on shoulders, vendors shouting, the air thick with smoke and sweat. At the center of the square, a wooden scaffold waits, freshly built, gleaming with sap and fear. This is not a stage for actors. It's a stage for suffering. For thousands of years, humanity turned death into theater. Not a quick end, not mercy, but spectacle. Because for most of history, punishment wasn't about removing life. It was about showing how long life could endure pain before it broke. This is the story of how people turned execution into art. How kings, priests, and judges made agony into order, and how, for centuries, crowds cheered as human bodies were pulled apart, burned alive, and broken slowly, all in the name of justice. The earliest known execution methods weren't just brutal. They were designed to mean something. Each one told a story. Each one was a warning carved into flesh. Take crucifixion. Invented by the Persians and perfected by the Romans, it was not just a punishment, it was theater. The condemned were nailed or tied to wooden crosses and left hanging for hours, sometimes days. Death came slowly, not from bleeding, but from suffocation. As the body sagged, the chest muscles failed. The condemned had to push up on pierced feet to gasp for air, prolonging the agony until exhaustion finally won. Crucifixion was public. It was meant to humiliate. It said, "This is what happens to those who defy power." And the longer it lasted, the louder the lesson. The Romans were masters of performance. They lined roads with crosses so travelers could see the cost of rebellion. Bodies hung like rotting billboards of obedience. Even after death, the corpses were left for vultures to finish what justice began. Then came Greece, where cruelty met creativity. According to ancient sources, a craftsman named Perillos once presented the tyrant Phalaris with a gift, a bronze statue shaped like a bull. Inside, it was hollow, with pipes in the nostrils that turned screams into music. Victims were locked inside and roasted alive while their cries echoed as a grotesque melody. Historians debate if the brazen bull truly existed or if it was a legend, but the fact that people believed it did tells you everything. Cruelty was no longer enough. Pain had to be beautiful. In Persia, a method called scaphism became infamous. A condemned man was trapped between two boats, his head, hands, and feet sticking out. Milk and honey were poured over him. Left under the sun, his skin blistered. Insects bred in his flesh. He was fed daily to keep him alive as he was eaten alive. Ancient writers claim the process lasted days. Whether every detail is true or not, the symbolism was clear. Death wasn't just punishment. It was corruption made visible. And for centuries, rulers across the world took that same principle. That pain could be meaning, and made it the foundation of law. By the Middle Ages, execution had evolved into ritual. It was no longer enough to kill. The body had to confess. The soul had to be purified, and the crowd had to be satisfied. In England, traitors faced the most infamous punishment of all: to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. First came the public humiliation, dragged through the streets behind horses, jeered at by the mob. Then the hanging, but not to death. They were cut down while still breathing, stripped and disemboweled. Their entrails burned before their eyes, their heads severed, their bodies chopped into 4 pieces, sent to the corners of the kingdom as a warning. The ceremony could last for hours. Children watched from rooftops. Vendors sold pies and wine, and the executioner became a kind of performer, pacing the pain, making sure the condemned lingered long enough for the lesson to sink in. In France and the Holy Roman Empire, another instrument of suffering reigned supreme: The wheel. A man condemned to the breaking wheel was tied across wooden spokes. The executioner carried a heavy iron bar and began at the legs, smashing bones one by one. Each blow splintered bone and shredded muscle until the body folded like wet parchment. Sometimes the skull was spared for last, a mercy blow known as the coup de grâce. But mercy wasn't guaranteed. Some victims were left alive for days, tied to the wheel under the sun, birds pecking at open wounds. The breaking wheel wasn't just a tool, it was an altar. Executed criminals were displayed on crossroads and city gates, their bodies turning slowly in the wind, bones glinting under the sky. And then there was fire. Burning at the stake became the church's preferred method for heresy, witchcraft, and blasphemy. It was both punishment and purification, a visible cleansing of the soul through flame. Before the fire was lit, priests would beg the condemned to repent. A single word of confession could mean the difference between strangulation before the burning or feeling every second of it. Eyewitnesses described the smell of hair catching first, the waxy skin blistering, the body curling in heat. The smoke would twist into the air, mingled with incense from nearby churches. Crowds prayed as they watched the soul rise in smoke. The church called it holy. The people called it justice. And the condemned called it mercy when it finally ended. But some deaths were meant to be slower. In the dungeons of Europe, pain became procedure. Torture was the prelude to execution, the body's confession before its destruction. The rack was simple and merciless. Limbs tied to rollers at each end. Each turn of the crank dislocated shoulders, tore ligaments, stretched the body until it screamed. The strappado lifted victims by their wrists behind their backs, dislocating shoulders in a single jerk. Iron boots crushed bones. Thumb screws ground cartilage into paste. Each device designed not just to kill, but to reveal truth through agony. In the eyes of inquisitors, suffering was holy. It wasn't cruelty, it was purification. Pain was the fire that burned lies away. Even when torture didn't kill, the execution that followed often did. The body was broken twice, first by the system, then by the sentence. As Europe entered the Renaissance, cruelty became creativity. Executioners were engineers. Pain became invention. In Central Europe, the saw punishment was whispered in fear. The condemned were hung upside down by their ankles, a long two-handled saw placed between their legs. Gravity kept blood rushing to the head, keeping them conscious longer as the blade carved through flesh, pelvis, and spine. Contemporary sources confirm it was used in parts of Germany and Eastern Europe, though later accounts likely exaggerated its frequency. Whether or not every detail is true, the reputation alone was enough to terrify. Then came the Iron Maiden, perhaps the most famous execution device that never was. A coffin-shaped chamber lined with spikes that pierced without killing instantly. Victims supposedly died slowly inside, impaled but alive. In truth, no medieval record confirms its use. The Iron Maiden was likely a 19th century invention, a museum fabrication born from real medieval tools like spiked cages and pressure boxes. But myth or not, it embodied the same idea: death made intimate, a private theatre of agony. And yet, even as Europe entered the Age of Enlightenment, it did not become kinder. The guillotine arrived in the late 18th century, hailed as a humane, rational method of execution. It was meant to end suffering instantly. No more torture, no more spectacle, just one swift drop of the blade. But instead of ending horror, it industrialized it. Crowds gathered in Paris to watch heads fall in perfect rhythm. Vendors sold souvenirs. Lovers dipped handkerchiefs in blood as keepsakes. the machine of mercy became the most efficient killer in history. A symbol of reason turned madness. Why did people watch? Why did thousands gather to see pain, to cheer, to laugh? Because execution was not just justice, it was theatre, it was ritual, it was reassurance that evil could be contained, that order could be restored through blood. In a world without prisons, every hanging, every burning, every broken body was a sermon. It taught obedience, it made morality visible. The condemned became mirrors, showing the crowd what could happen if they stepped out of line. And it worked. People believed they were watching righteousness in motion, but they were also watching themselves, their fears, their desires, their fascination with pain. Some chroniclers describe children climbing onto gallows to see better, mothers feeding infants beside the scaffold, taverns offering execution breakfasts. Human suffering was not just punishment. It was community entertainment. And every scream was an echo of authority, from king to commoner, from priest to peasant, all bound together by blood. Eventually, the spectacle began to change. By the 17th and 18th centuries, executions started to move behind walls. Pain became shameful, something to be hidden, not celebrated. But the fascination never left. Artists painted martyrs with serene faces as they burned. Writers romanticized the gallows. Audiences still craved the thrill. Only now, it came through stories, not reality. When the guillotine finally fell silent, the crowd moved to the theatre, the novel, the newspaper. Execution had gone private, but the stage was the same. We stopped gathering to watch bodies die and started gathering to imagine it instead. Walk through the streets of Europe today, the same squares where thousands once died. The gallows are gone, the pyres are ash, but the ground remembers. Every cobblestone has soaked in blood. Every church bell once tolled for the condemned. Every crowd that cheers today, at concerts, at stadiums, stands on the same stones where another kind of cheering once rose. Because the truth is, humanity never lost its appetite for spectacle. We only changed its shape. We traded the scaffold for the screen, the executioner for the storyteller, and the cry for mercy, for the gasp of an audience. Pain never really left us. It just learned to perform in silence. This was hidden by time. Subscribe for more stories history tried to bury. Because the past doesn't just haunt us, it performs for us still.